How many of y'all know this hymn? It is on page 565 in your hymn book, by the way. So send I you, by grace made strong to triumph. Yes, you have. We'll have to sing it again one day. Margaret Clarkston wrote this. She was born in 1915 and died in 2008, not too long ago. She wrote the first draft of it in 1954, and we're going to actually compare both drafts. And then she wrote a revision to it in 1963 after the Lord opened her eyes to some things that she wrote in the first draft. She spent over 30 years teaching in public school system, and she's written over 17 books. She wanted to be a missionary all of her life, but she was physically disabled, and that was not an option for her to travel and be a missionary. So she did get her teaching degree, but she could not find a job in her home city, so she had to go off a good distance, and for 7 years, she taught school in what she said she felt very lonely. She felt very depressed. She found very few Christians. She found no church that had a Bible-believing congregation. She found no fellowship where she was at, and she just was at a very lonely place. And that's when she wrote the first version of this. So we're going to take it and look at it. But when you think of the word missionaries, who are some of the ones that come to mind? Yes, absolutely. Tim Williams, Earl, Matt and Alta's son-in-law, and his parents were missionaries in Africa, and Tim and Amy have been on the missionary field many times. What do you know about Georgia Barnett? We take that offering up every year. What do you know about Georgia Barnett? Correct. It is the offering we take up for missions within the state of Louisiana. And to date, that offering has done mission work for over $154 million since it started. What do you know about Annie Armstrong? What's that one for? Okay, that's national. It's North American missions. And to date, it has contributed over $2 billion into missionaries. What about Lottie Moon? That's the one that's international. And to date, it has contributed over $4 billion to the mission work that's done. So there are some three that gave some wonderful examples and some testimonies and witnesses before us that we still give to and support today. So we're going to look at some of these, but before we get to do that, I've given several of y'all some pieces of paper, and I want you to hear about some of the 6 missionaries and their work and exactly some of the things that they went through. So who has Jim Elliott? All right, Miss Alta, read that for us, please. His only joy was that when God gave him a work, he didn't refuse it. So those are some good stories. So let's look at this. What I'm going to do is we're going to look at each verse, and I'm going to tell you her original version, and then we're going to read what she changed it to. There was a 15-year period between version 1 and version 2. So this is the last version. So before I read it, here's what she wrote in the beginning. So send I you to labor unrewarded, to serve unpaid, unloved, unsought, unknown, to bear rebuke, to suffer scorn and scoffing. So send I you to toil for me alone. That was the first version. 15 years later, she writes, so send I you, by grace made strong to triumph. Thinking about that first verse, she was kind of depressed, and she was kind of thinking, God's left me here all alone. But then when her eyes were opened, she writes a whole nother picture. So send I you by grace made strong to triumph, or a host of hell, or darkness, death, and sin, my name to bear, and in that name to conquer, so send I you my victory to win. She is speaking from the person of Jesus Christ. This I and my is not her, is not Margaret. It is talking about Jesus. So Jesus is saying, by grace, he's been made us strong to triumph. That it's his name that we will bear, and because of it. But in her very first one, she said, no reward, no justification, no pat on the back, no nothing. And God's given, I've given you everything you need to triumph for the job that I've called you to do. Second verse. She writes, so send I you to bind the bruised and broken, over wandering souls to work, to weep, to wake, to bear the burden of a world weary, so send I you to suffer for my sake. And she writes, 15 years later, so send I you to take to souls in bondage the word of truth that sets the captives free. To break the bonds of sin, to loose death's fetters, so send I you to bring the lost to me. First time she was like, you're sending me to go fix all these broken up people. And he's going, no, I'm sending you to set them free. Not to heal their wounds, but to set them free for forever. Third verse. She writes, so send I you to loneliness and longing, with heart a hungering for the loved and unknown. Forsaken home and kindred friend and dear one, so send I you to know my love alone. And the Lord pressed on her 15 years later. So send I you my strength to know in weakness, my joy in grief, my perfect peace in pain, to prove my power, my grace, my promise, presence. So send I you eternal fruit to gain. He's opening her eyes and saying, it ain't about you. It's about me. And your eyes have been made to see now where the joy, where that peace, where that fruit is, and it's found in him. And so she was like, it's not for just him to say he loves me, but for other people to know what she knew. And so she was encouraged by doing that, and even though she knew she wouldn't be able to go to the mission field. All right, fourth one. She writes, so send I you to hearts made hard by hatred. Ever been there? To eyes made blind because they will not see. To spend, though it through it be blood, to spend and share not. So send I you to taste of Calvary. So she writes, so send I you to bear my cross with patience, and then one day with joy to lay it down. To hear my voice, well done, my faithful servant, come share my throne, my kingdom, and my crown. So we can see now that she was really in a dark place when she wrote it the first time. But then after many years, the Lord showed her, and she goes on to say that after she wrote the revision, she went back and she asked people to stop singing the original and to change it to this one. This one had a positive message. That one did not. And she reminded people that would contact her about publishing it should say, but you got to do my newest version. You've got to do the truth and not how I felt at that particular time. All right, let's watch this video. She got this from John 20:21, and I wanted just to hear the whole chapter before we reflected on that particular verse 21. So let's listen to this passage. She wrote this hymn based on, as the Father has sent me, so send I you. If I had just read that passage and not given you the whole context of what it was, I don't think that we would appreciate exactly what it is that Jesus is saying. When he said, as the Father has sent me, what are some of those characteristics that the Father, what are some of the ways that God sent him? And y'all are looking at me like you're confused. God sent him in a human form, didn't he? So that's one of the ways that God sent the Father. As he sent him in a human form. Okay? You and I are in the same way. We are in a human form. Where did he send him to? He sent him to the lost people. He sent him to proclaim that he was the Messiah. That doesn't change. As God sent Jesus to do that, God has sent you and I to do the exact same thing. As he sent the Father, we are to do the same thing. Where did he send him to? Did he send him to the corner grocery store? No. He left his home. He traveled. You and I have got to do, wherever we are sent is where we got to go. Okay? So the characteristics, and for what reason? As the Father sent Jesus, he sent him here. Why? Okay, to save the world, to change life forever. Okay? People are not going to understand that life and that life changing unless we share it with them. God has sent us. Jesus is sending us just the same way that he sent Jesus here. We got to do those exact same things. Whatever he modeled, we have to do. Now, when we look back at scriptures, we'll see so many times that when he is going to lost people, when he's going to the sinners, he's a very compassionate God. The times that we see that he gets flustered is when he's talking to the church, when he's talking to the high priest that ought to know better. So in those same ways, we sometimes get in the habit of treating lost people like they ought to be acting like we do. But they don't know the truth yet. So how are they going to do that? So we have to take them where they are and get them to a life-changing God. Instead of us trying to say, we want you to fit our particular mold. It's not going to work. That's not the example that Jesus did. We'll see time and time again that he met people's physical needs before he ever talked to them about him being the Messiah. Because if you don't fix that physical need, they're not in the frame of mind or in the heart to receive anything else. All they're thinking about is the place that they're in that particular moment. And we see Jesus time and time again that's fixing their physical needs. So we are to do the same things in the same forms that he has sent. So, God may not have ever told anyone in here to hit the mission field in Africa, Zambia, Ukraine, any of those places, but he did tell all of us to hit the mission field everywhere you are every day. The mission field doesn't mean just people that's been called to that outside these doors. It means every one of us has got an assignment to do. And when he said, so send I you, he didn't say, so send I them. He called you by name. Okay? If that passage was for us to accept it, we got to change that word from you to Waylon, to Karen, to Linda. Whatever your name is, God sent you. Now, you're going everywhere you go. But the question is, are you taking him with you? Are they seeing that out of you, or are they seeing something totally different? I love to give y'all the rest of the story. And in this, she had heard two girls, little girls that were talking, and when she started rewriting the verses after 15 years, this is the motivation. At one point, someone, and she said, sometime and someone at some point in your life makes all the difference in the world. Two little girls were sent by their mother to gather wild blackberries for a pie. Both soon discovered that the tangled, thorny bushes grabbed at their clothes and tore at their skin. One was so upset because of the difficulties that she returned home immediately with an empty bucket. The second daughter returned later, a bit disheveled, covered with little scratches, but her bucket was full and with sweet, juicy berries. It will be worth it all, she said, when I taste the pie. You're going to walk some thorny places. You're going to get dirty. But it's going to be worth it all when we get to eternity and hear our Father say, well done, my good and faithful servant. And then the prospect of all of that before flies away from us. So that was her motivation to change the words that she had done. So I challenge all of us. Each day, say, I'm out to the mission field. Say it out loud. What are you going to do today? Oh, I'm hitting the mission field. If we think it in that way and discover that that world is our mission field, we are planted. Sometimes that's your family. Sometimes that's your friends. Sometimes that's your enemy. But places that you go, that's your mission field. I remember Bill Britt sharing with me one time. He was in a grocery store, and this customer was in there, and they were mad as they can be, and they're cussing and screaming up a storm, just hollering, and he's in the line fixing to check out, and he just starts hollering, praise the Lord, and he starts testifying, he's screaming, y'all know Bill Britt, just as loud as the other guy, and the guy finally said, what are you doing? He said, well, you're giving devil a lot of props, and he said, I'm giving God the same loud props that you're doing, And so do we do that, or do we cower down? When the world hits us, do we stand up and say, God's got to have equal time. God actually deserves more than equal, doesn't he? But we will let the world and the things that are going on around us silence us. And God's going, but wait a minute, you're standing there in that place just like she was for 7 years in an area she did not want to teach until she realized that's the very place that God wanted her to do a work. And you may not see it here, but there are times that we look back and go, that's why you placed me there? 7, 8 years, 10 years from now, we'll look back and go, duh, that's an aha moment, that we realize that God was using us. Do you know that God does not have to explain anything to you? He doesn't have to tell any of us why. And it's not for us to question. It is for us to obey. And when he said, as the Father sent me, so send I you, but not until you think you're ready. Or not until you've gathered enough money, or you've been able to retire, or you got a vehicle to drive. Whatever stipulation we put on it, God's going, really? All you need is me. You don't need nothing else, And we talked about it today in leadership. When God calls us to do something, he's going to give you the tools necessary to do the job he's called you to do. And no matter how much you fight it, when God has called you, you are not content until you are doing what he called you to do. And you do not have a choice. And that's where she was. For those 7 years, she was like, I'm in a really bad spot. And then at the end of it, she was like, I was in a wonderful spot. And it takes us time to learn that, okay? I looked and looked and looked for a arrangement of this, and I didn't find any that I liked. And so we're not going to, y'all don't get a rendition of it tonight, but just, somebody needs to go record it that has a decent, because it wasn't. And the ones that did find was the old version, and I didn't want to leave y'all with the old version. I wanted y'all to see that there's positivity in the newer version and take that message with you instead of the other one, okay? Don't take those divine appointments for granted. God puts us places for a reason, so. All right? Okay, let's stand together. Mr. Wayne Musselwhite, will you close our time, please, sir?